watched the verdict with a few of my fellow Dream Defenders, and to be frank, the moment crumbled my heart. It crushed me because, as many people around the country believe, there was an enormous amount of evidence that proved that this was murder. It was cold-blooded murder, and it crumbled me to hear the verdict, to see the joy on the faces of the murderer of Trayvon Martin, and I think that was felt around the country. It was our 9/11. It's a moment that we'll never, ever, ever forget. And so what we're planning in Florida and what we saw is in Tallahassee, our students, 250 of our students marched to the Capitol. In Miami and Tampa and Orlando and Gainesville, students rose up and young people rose up in response to the verdict. And what we're planning on Tuesday, as you said, is a takeover of the Capitol. If they believed, as many people in the media have stated, that our people were going to destroy their neighborhoods, destroy their businesses, destroy their communities in response to this verdict, they've got another thing coming. Because young people are smarter. Young people are more organized, and young people are more prepared than anybody has ever given us credit for. And unfortunately, it took this verdict to show that. So on Tuesday, on tomorrow, we're going to take over Tallahassee. We're going to call on our lawmakers to answer for their crimes, because though George Zimmerman was found not guilty, the state of Florida is very much guilty. They've got a history of disregard for young people, and right now the state of Florida is raising a generation of second-class citizens, over-criminalized young people who have no freedoms, who have no safety, who have no security, who are undereducated and overpopulated in their jails. So this was a stark realization of it. It crumbled me, but it also strengthened my resolve, as it did for young people around the country and as it did for the Dream Defenders.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, where were you when you heard the verdict, and what is your response?
I was downtown in the NBC studio. We thought that the jury had gone home for the night. We were doing a summation of the first 2 days, and then the news broke that the verdict came in that Zimmerman was set free. And we were all stunned because it's been all the time arguing about the altercation, but none of the time the fact that an armed man saw from another neighborhood, saw an unarmed boy going home and violated police appeals to him, and he murdered him by his own admission. And for 44 days, we had to protest to get the trial in the very first place. And so it was so very clear that here was a case of murder based upon suspicion. And I looked, as I felt the pain of it all, I thought about what Medgar Evers meant to that generation and Emmett Till to that generation. Now Trayvon speaks for these times, Amy, because a jury without a black, without a male on the jury, where the prosecutors avoided the issue of race, and the defendants sought to deny the issue of race, and race is the big issue in the case. It is a sign of our time to attempt to dismiss the reality of the quest for equal protection and the racial justice.
I wanted to go to Trayvon Martin's family attorney, Benjamin Crump. The family has not spoken, been publicly seen since the verdict. They were not in the courtroom. But this is their attorney, Benjamin Crump, responding to the not guilty verdict in George Zimmerman's case.
This morning, Martin Luther King's daughter, Dr. Bernice King, tweeted me a message that read, "Today is a defining moment for the status of my father's dream. Whatever the Zimmerman verdict is," she tweeted, "in the words of my father, we must conduct ourselves on the higher plane of dignity and discipline." Trayvon Martin will forever remain in the annals of history next to Medgar Evers and Emmett Till as symbols for the fight for equal justice for all.
I want to turn now to the comments made by George Zimmerman's attorney, Mark O'Mara, after the verdict was announced. He claims Zimmerman would not have been charged had he been black.
Well, I think that the things would have been different if George Zimmerman was black for this reason. He never would have been charged with a crime. It seems as though what happened was an event that was being looked into by Sanford Police Department, and quite honestly, as we now know, looked into quite well. I have taken advantage of police departments who have not done a good investigation of crimes because that's what I do for a living. When I looked at the Sanford Police Department investigation, they had done quite a good job, and you can compare what they did across the country to see who does good or bad jobs with their investigation, but they were doing quite a lot. What happened was this became a focus for a civil rights event, which again is a wonderful event to have, but they decided that George Zimmerman would be the person who they were to blame and sort of use as the creation of a civil rights violation, none of which was borne out by the facts. The facts that night was not borne out that he acted in a racial way. His history is a non-racist, and you know all the anecdotes about the mentees and the children living in his home when he was young and the Sherman Ware incident. So if only those who decide to condemn Mr. Zimmerman as quickly and as viciously as they did would have taken just a little bit of time to find out who it was that they were condemning, it would never have happened. And it certainly wouldn't have happened if he was black, because those people who decided that they were going to make him the scapegoat would not have.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, your response to both Mark O'Mara, the defense attorney, and Benjamin Crump, the attorney for Trayvon Martin's parents.
Well, you don't have to be a racist to have a racial stereotype. The assumptions about a young black in a white neighborhood, the fact is he was in a mixed neighborhood. He was going home to be with his father. If Zimmerman had been black and Trayvon had been white, there had been a very different response. He would not have walked away from the scene without a drug test or an alcohol test, or walked away without being faced with the law that night. Zimmerman walked away without a blood test, alcohol, or drugs, walked away for 44 days until that was protest. So that is convoluted. What we do know is that he was stereotyped, and he was pursued over objections, and he was killed with the gun of the armed man. We know that. But probably trying this case again, I think the symbolism of Trayvon, there is a Trayvon in every town. That's why it is Oscar Grant in Oakland killed, and now the movie Fruitvale, is it? Fruitvale. It is Diallo killed in New York City. It is in Chicago last year, 57 shootings by police, 57 shooting, 93% black or brown. There's a Trayvon in every town. So whether it's the shootings or the expulsions or the jailings, and I thought that the prosecutor, by not demanding a black or male be on the jury, missed a chance to make the case what it really was.
Civil rights case of the
Let me ask you about Mark O'Mara saying he appealed to Mr. Crump to not talk about this as a civil rights case. Reverend Jackson.
Well, of course it is a civil rights case, and that's why I think there'll be a civil suit filed. I think the Department of Justice will intervene because of overwhelming public requests for it to take place. And I think that the avoidance of the essence of this case will not do us any real service. I look, Amy, at around the country, for we're asking people to protest with dignity and discipline. Any act of violence will discredit Trayvon's legacy. We do not want any violence to occur. We never have, as a matter of fact. We feel that the violence shifts the sympathy from Zimmerman to Trayvon. Trayvon deserves it, Zimmerman but does not. What also pains me is that here are two young men. One is dead in the grave. One's a kind of walking dead. He's kind of limited in his life options because of something called violence. The whole idea of resolving conflict through more guns, more violence is a dead proposition. So there's a certain concern about the life options of Zimmerman, which are very limited, and the life of Trayvon, which exists no more.
Pending a decision about his concealed weapons permit, George Zimmerman is expected to have his gun returned to him, the gun with which he shot Trayvon Martin. Speaking to ABC News, defense attorney Mark O'Mara said George Zimmerman has, quote, even more reason to carry a gun now.
Does he get that gun back?
Yes, he does.
How do you think he feels about guns now?
I think that he feels truly in his heart that if he did not have that weapon that night, he might not be here.
So do you think he would, if he could, he would carry a gun again?
Yes. Even more reason now, isn't there? A lot more people out there who actually hate him, though they shouldn't.
So you're saying he needs to protect himself?
Yes.
And the way to do it is by carrying a weapon?
It's one way.
It was not only Mark O'Mara, the defense attorney, who talked about George Zimmerman now needing his gun. His brother, Robert Zimmerman, in an interview on CNN, said the same, that he would need it now more than ever. What are your thoughts about that, Philip Agnew? George Zimmerman walking around afraid with a gun?
Oh, the irony. Oh, the irony that George Zimmerman would be afraid of a vigilante accosting him in the dead of night and taking his life. Oh, the cycle of violence that is perpetuated by hate. I'd like to really quickly speak because as I watched CNN, as I watched HLN, I never saw a young person of color on there able to speak. And I'd like to take this opportunity to speak directly to Mark O'Mara and Don West, who overspoke, who have decided to speak to whether we should be angry, whether we should be hurt at the verdict, and tell them they don't have any right to speak for us. They don't have any right to speak to us, because what they've done is effectively convince folks that this is not about race. This is not about hate. And it's our avoidance of that subject in Florida. It's our refusal as a country to acknowledge that we still have a race problem in America that creates environments for a man like George Zimmerman to walk around as he does now with a gun, looking to take down black people, looking to take down young people of color. So it scares me. Quite frankly, it scares me that this vigilante is able to do that. But what we're doing now, what Dream Defenders are doing now, is looking to advance the conversation with George Zimmerman in mind and with most definitely Trayvon Martin in our hearts. Move the conversation to a place where young people are at the front, where young people are speaking for us. It's a new day, and I think we saw that around the country. You saw it a year ago at the death of Trayvon Martin, and you've seen it now at the acquittal of George Zimmerman, that young people are taking their power and taking it to the streets. And unfortunately, it took something like this to happen. But Mark O'Mara can't speak for us. He can't speak to the civil rights nature of this case. He can't speak to what it feels like to be a young black or brown person in this country, or a young poor white person in this country. He can't speak to whether we should be hurt, because we are. And it was a stark realization of that on Saturday. And the fact that George Zimmerman has to now carry a gun because he feels people are afraid of him, I believe is warranted. But I don't believe that anybody in my community is going to do anything stupid as the media wants to portray. I believe he has more fear from himself, from his guilt.
George Zimmerman did not testify during his trial, but prosecutors did present him to jurors by playing part of an interview he did last year with Sean Hannity of Fox News. This is a clip of what the jurors did hear from George Zimmerman.
Is there anything you regret? Do you regret getting out of the car to follow Trayvon that night?
No, sir.
Do you regret that you had a gun that night?
No, sir.
Do you feel you wouldn't be here for this interview if you didn't have that gun?
No, sir.
You feel you would not be here?
I feel that it was all God's plan, and for me to second guess it or judge it.
Is there anything you might do differently in retrospect now that time has passed a little bit?
No, sir.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, your response.
He murdered him in the name of God. He would not be that during the interview if, in fact, he had not followed him. He would not have killed him if he had not had the gun. And he would not have been out 44 days had he not had sanctuary by the Sanford police. And so everything about this is as unreasonable. That's why the Dreamers are marching in Florida. That's why we support those Dreamers. But around the nation, Dreamers must march and focus on the Trayvon in their town, because the impact of young blacks, the most expelled, the most jailed, the most unemployed, the most killed, the most unemployed, it calls for a real congressional, if not indeed a UN study on the plight of young black men in America.